prom, he did enter into a relationship after high school. In 75, when Jesperson was 20, he married Rose Huck, and the couple had 3 children together, 2 daughters and 1 son, and Jesperson worked as a truck driver to support the family. A common element that you'll see in many of the serial killers, they're truck drivers, long distance truck drivers, and they have a lot of time to think about these things. Interviews from a lot of these, people have taught us that they have opportunity. They don't have anyone that they know around them. They have access to prostitutes. They have access to people who are, hitchhiking, don't really have a lot of connections. People won't miss them as quickly or at all. And so that becomes very opportunistic. And so I usually say at the end of all of my podcasts, don't pick up hitchhikers and don't be a hitchhiker. I'm very serious about that. Some people think I'm joking about it, but I'm not. I mean, don't do that. Don't, I think we have to take responsibility and be very wise about our choices. So don't put yourself in these situations where you are very highly likely to be hurt in some way or killed. Because we see this over and over and over and over and over again. So let's be wise, right? Let's be wise out there. Don't do things that put yourself in harm's way on purpose. We have as much responsibility to take care of ourselves as these people have a responsibility to be able to control themselves. So, several years later, after, of course, he was married to Rose, Huck began to suspect that Jesperson was having affairs with strange women when strange women would call. Tension in the marriage increased, and after 14 years, while Jesperson was on the road, Huck packed up her and her children's belongings and drove 200 miles away to live with her parents in Spokane, Washington. The oldest child, Melissa, was 10 years old, and Jesperson continued to spend time with his children when he was in town, but they divorced in 1990. At age 35, he was 6'7", which is really odd because it's reported that he was 6'6". So 6'6", 6'7", he's still a big man. And he weighed 255 pounds. Huge man. Jesperson began working toward the goal of joining the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, but an injury suffered while training ended that endeavor. He then sought work again as an interstate truck driver after relocating to Cheney, Washington. He soon realized that this job afforded him the opportunity to kill without being suspected. Bingo, right? Interstate truck driver. Certainly not saying that that's the case on all truck drivers. There are some wonderful truck drivers that I know personally, but it is an opportunity. It is an opportunity. So we know that his first victim was Tanya Bennett on January 21st of 1990 near Portland, Oregon. He introduced himself to Bennett at a bar and invited her to a house he was renting. And after getting in an argument with Bennett, he strangled her to death and with his hands and disposed of her body. On August 30th of 92, the currently unidentified body of a woman Jesperson had raped and strangled was found near Blythe, California. Jesperson gives the Jane Doe's name as Claudia. A month later, in Turlock, California, the body of Cynthia Lynn Rose was discovered. Jesperson claims Rose was a sex worker who entered his truck at a truck stop while he slept. His fourth victim was another sex worker, Lori Ann Pentland of Salem, Oregon, whose body was found in November of 92. According to Jesperson, Pentland attempted to double the fee she charged for the sex he'd been engaged in with her. She threatened to call the police, and he strangled her. Jesperson killed his next victim in June of 93 in Santa Nella, California. She was a previously unidentified woman named Patricia Skipple, who he claimed was named Carly or Cindy. Police originally considered her death a drug overdose, but in September of '94, another Jane Doe was found in Crestview, Florida. Jesperson claims that her name was Suzanne. She was identified as Suzanne Kellenberg by Othram on October 3rd of 2023. So see, this is the newest victim that has brought him back up into mainstream media. So now they've identified another one, Suzanne Kellenberg. Jesperson was arrested on March 30th, 95 for the murder of Julia Winningham. He had been questioned by police a week before, but they had no grounds to arrest him after he refused to talk. In the days following, Jesperson decided that he was certainly going to be arrested, and after 2 suicide attempts, turned himself in, hoping it would result in leniency during his sentencing. I often find that many of these serial killers, violent offenders, believe that they can charm their way out of these things. They've typically charmed their way out of other situations, so they feel like they can charm their way into a lesser sentence. This worked very well for Bundy. He was charming. So, for years, he was able to get away with things. He was able to get away from or avoid being arrested. All these things happened. And, I think we've learned, or we should know by now, that if we suspect something, if we have that sense about somebody, we should move forward with it because we're typically right. That's why we have the judicial system. That's why we have the court system, is to work through these things. If they're innocent, they typically will be found innocent. If they're not, then hopefully they'll be convicted. And I know there are hundreds, if not thousands, of innocent people sitting in jail right now. I completely empathize with you, and I know that it's horrible to spend your life in jail for something that you did not do. There's no way it can't be. There's no way it can't be. But at some point, I feel like the system will work for you. We have so many different organizations now who actually spend their time working on cold cases, trying to solve murders that perhaps other people were. There's like a lot of innocence projects that universities do. Retired policemen, investigators, they do a lot of that stuff as well. So I think that, unfortunately, these people do lose a lot of their lives being unjustly convicted. But on the flip side of that, what other way is there to get people, caught for doing these type of things? The savior in all of this really is that we have such advanced DNA, and we can eliminate people just as easily as we can identify people. A lot of times people will be released from prison because they become eliminated after their DNA, our technology has gotten so advanced, and it continues to get advanced, that we can rule someone out and say, way back when, you were in this category because you had the same blood type. Well, later on, we had this technology, and you couldn't be ruled out because, it was you and 100,000 other people. But today we can pinpoint those things, even doing that genealogy with DNA. Even if that person is dead, we can find a family member. So it's really, science has really helped us to be able to narrow down and reduce the number of people who get thrown in prison. So it's really, there's always a flip side to things, right? We want people who are murderers and serial killers and violent offenders to be in prison, but we also have to accept that there are people who are innocent that are also in prison, and hopefully they will be vindicated at some point. So when Jesperson found that he was, going to be arrested, he attempted to kill himself twice. He was hoping it would result in leniency, but while in custody, he began revealing details of his killings and making claims of many others, most of which he later recanted. Very common. A few days before his arrest, he wrote a letter to his brother in which he confessed to have killed 8 people over the course of 5 years. This led police agencies in several states to reopen old cases, many of which were found to be possible victims of Jesperson. Although Jesperson at one point claimed to have had as many as 160 victims, only the 8 killed in Washington, Oregon, California, Florida, Nebraska, and Wyoming have been confirmed. He's serving 3 consecutive life sentences at the Oregon State Penitentiary in Salem. In September of 2009, he was indicted in Riverside County, California on murder charges and was extradited in December of 2009. He was convicted of another murder and received a 4th life sentence in January of 2010. And again, I think that they want to be able to close these cases. I wish there was a different way to do it other than having a full-blown trial, because families have to go through this over and over and over again. So I hesitate. That's just one of the reasons I feel like if they've already gotten, in this case, 3 life sentences, what's the 4th one going to change? Nothing. It ensures he's never coming out. But then again, he was always guaranteed he wasn't coming out. Early in the investigation of Bennett's murder, we know that Laverne Pavlinac, she read the news story about Bennett's death and then saw it as an opportunity to force an end to the long-term abusive relationship she'd been with her live-in boyfriend, John Sosnovsky. So literally, to get out of an abusive relationship, she admitted that she and her boyfriend murdered Laverne Pavlinac. I mean, that's pretty bad. If that's the only way you can find out, that's really bad. Pavlinac set up a meeting with investigators and gave a false confession using the details she'd read in the newspaper to give a detailed story of how Sosnovsky forced her to help him rape, murder, and dispose of Bennett's body. Pavlinac and Sosnovsky were both arrested on March 5th of 1990, and both were convicted of the murder on February 8th of 91. To avoid the possibility of facing the death penalty, Sosnovsky pleaded no contest, and he was sentenced to life in prison, while Pavlinac was sentenced to no less than 10 years, much more than she had anticipated. Pavlinac soon admitted to making up her entire story, but her claims were ignored. On January 7th of 96, more than 5 years after their conviction, Pavlinac and Sosnovsky were released from prison after Jesperson and his attorney offered his confession. And with convincing evidence of his guilt, he had given police officers the location of the victim's purse, and the purse had not been found at the crime scene, and its location was considered information only the killer would know. Remember that when you see these news stories come across TV or social media, they know so much more than they're telling us, and they do that for this very reason. If I'm going to do something, if I'm a cop and I want to find out, if I want proof that someone did it, this is one of the ways to do it. If they know details of the crime that no one else knows, that the police know, but they've not released to the public, that can be used in court to prove they were there, they did it, they know more about this than anyone else. So that's why they do those things. And in this case, it worked out, right? It worked out that it helped free Pavlinac and Sosnovsky. But honestly, they need help. They needed help too, right? Pavlinac being abused and then being able to lie about something like that. And then, of course, Sosnovsky for being an abuser. So during all this time, all that attention was going to Pavlinac and Sosnovsky, but Jesperson wrote that confession on the bathroom wall, remember. Nothing came up. Nothing happened with that. So he decided he would write letters to media outlets and police departments confessing to the murders, and he started with a 6-page letter to the Oregonian, in which he revealed the details of the killings. He signed each letter with a smiley face, and this led Phil Stanford, the journalist who was working the story for the Oregonian, to dub Jesperson the happy face killer. That happens all the time. Most of the time, social media, newspaper